Story 1. The Scratching Shadows of the Texas Night. The Texas fall was merciless that year, the air thick and heavy, clinging to my skin like a damp blanket. I was 13, sprawled across my bed in our creaky old house on the edge of town, where the street lights flickered and the night stretched endlessly into the horizon. The window was cracked open, letting in the faintest breeze, but it did little to ease the oppressive heat. I tossed and turned, my sheets tangled around my legs until exhaustion finally pulled me under. In my dream, the world was wrong. The shadows in my room twisted unnaturally, pooling in corners like spilled ink. A figure emerged from the darkness, its face a skeletal mask, hollow eyes boring into me. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, as it crawled through the open window, bony fingers scraping against the frame. Before I could scream, it lunged, clawing at my neck and chest with jagged nails. Pain seared through me, sharp and burning, and I jolted awake, gasping. My heart hammered against my ribs as I sat up, clutching my throat. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of moonlight spilling through the window. My skin stung, and when I touched my neck, my fingers came away wet. Stumbling to the mirror, I flicked on the lamp and stared at my reflection. 3 thin, bloody scratches marked my neck and chest, raw and angry. My breath caught, panic rising, until I noticed my own nails, jagged from nervous biting. I must have scratched myself in my sleep. Relief flooded me, shaky but real, and I laughed at my own foolishness. Just a nightmare, just my own hands. I climbed back into bed, pulling the sheet over me, trying to shake off the lingering unease. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. Then it came, a faint, deliberate scratching at the bathroom window down the hall. It was sharp, rhythmic, like nails dragging across glass. I froze, straining to listen. Probably just a bug, I told myself. June bugs were long gone, but maybe a moth or a beetle had gotten trapped against the screen. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the sound to stop, willing my heart to slow, but it didn't stop. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, and then, impossibly, it spread. A second set of scratches joined the first, this time from my bedroom window, just feet from where I lay. My eyes snapped open, my body rigid. The sound was unmistakable now. Not a bug, not the wind, but something deliberate, something trying to get in. I slid off the bed, my bare feet cold against the hardwood, and crept toward the window. My hand shook as I gripped the curtain, hesitating. The scratching was relentless, a grating clawing that seemed to echo inside my skull. I yanked the curtain aside. Nothing. The backyard was still, bathed in pale moonlight. The oak tree stood motionless, its branches bare against the night sky. No animals, no wind, no explanation. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned closer, searching for any sign of movement. The scratching had stopped the moment I opened the curtain, leaving only silence. I let out a shaky laugh, trying to convince myself it was nothing. I turned back to bed, my legs unsteady, and pulled the sheet over my head like a shield. Then it started again, louder, fiercer, from both windows at once. The bathroom and bedroom windows rattled with frantic, clawing scratches as if something was tearing at the glass with desperate intent. My heart lurched, and I curled into a ball, pressing my hands over my ears. The sound was everywhere, surrounding me, a cacophony of unseen talons scraping, digging, demanding entry. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to do something. I bolted from the bed, my feet pounding against the floor as I sprinted down the hall to my brother's room. Ethan was 9, 4 years younger than me, but fearless in a way I'd never been. His room was a fortress of his own making, the floor littered with wooden swords he'd carved from scraps and toy machetes he'd collected from watching too many horror movies. I shook him awake, my voice trembling as I spilled out the story, the dream, the scratches, the noises. His eyes, bleary at first, sharpened with a mix of curiosity and defiance. Before he could respond, a new sound cut through the air, a furious scratching at his window, sharp and violent like claws raking through wood. Ethan's face hardened, and he grabbed one of his makeshift swords, gripping it like a knight ready for battle. "Stay behind me," he whispered, his voice steady despite the chaos. The scratching grew louder, joined by a low, guttural whine like wind howling through a broken pipe. The air felt heavy, charged, as if the house itself was alive and angry. We crept into the hallway, the floorboards creaking under our weight. The vent next to Ethan's door rattled violently, the metal slats clanging as if something was trying to force its way through. I grabbed his arm, my nails digging into his skin. "We need to check on Lily," I whispered, glancing at our younger sister's closed bedroom door. She was only 6, too young to face whatever this was. But as we stepped toward her room, her doorknob began to twist, a frantic, jerky motion that made my stomach drop. The scratching was everywhere now, windows, vents, doors, all of it blending into a deafening assault. Ethan tightened his grip on his sword. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice low but firm. We ran, our bare feet slapping against the floor as we raced toward the living room. The house seemed to fight us every step of the way. The front door rattled in its frame, the knob twisting as if turned by invisible hands. The back door, the garage door, every entrance was under attack, the wood groaning under the pressure of relentless clawing. The large windows in the living room and kitchen shook, the glass vibrating with the force of 1,000 unseen nails scraping, tearing, shredding. We stumbled into the kitchen, our breaths ragged. I grabbed a meat mallet from the counter, its weight reassuring in my trembling hands. Ethan snatched a spatula, brandishing it like a dagger. They were pathetic weapons, but they were all we had. The noises were unbearable now, a symphony of chaos that drowned out our thoughts. Ethan's eyes blazed with reckless courage. "I'm going to face it," he declared, marching toward the front door. "No," I hissed, grabbing his arm, but he shook me off. Before I could stop him, he flung the door open, his spatula raised like a sword. The world outside was still, the air thick with the scent of dry grass and distant rain. The scratching stopped, the rattling ceased. The howling wind that had filled the house vanished, leaving only the sound of our own breathing, loud and uneven, in the sudden silence. Ethan stood in the doorway, his small frame silhouetted against the night. "There's nothing here," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. I joined him, peering into the darkness. The yard was empty, the street quiet. No shadows moved, no claws glinted in the moonlight. It was as if the night had swallowed whatever had been tormenting us. Ethan shut the door, locking it with a click that echoed in the stillness. We stood there, shaking, our makeshift weapon still clutched in our hands. After a long moment, we laughed, nervous, shaky laughs that broke the tension. "Maybe it was just the wind," I said, though I didn't believe it. Ethan nodded, but his eyes darted to the windows, Still wary, we crept back upstairs, too shaken to be alone. Ethan sat on my bed, his wooden sword across his lap, keeping watch like a sentinel. I lay down, my heart still racing, the mallet beside me. The house was quiet now, but the silence felt fragile, like it could shatter at any moment. I didn't sleep that night, and neither did Ethan. We stayed vigilant, waiting for the scratching to return, but it never did. Decades later, I still can't explain that night. The scratches on my neck faded, but the memory of that sound, those relentless clawing noises, still haunts me. The house never felt the same after that, always carrying a faint unease like it was watching us. Ethan and I never spoke of it again, but I know he remembers it too. It was the wildest, scariest night of my life, and no amount of time can dull its edge. Story 2, The Rattling Doorknob. As a young girl, I lived in an old, creaking house on the outskirts of a small Texas town, where the windows seemed to carry secrets through the brittle wooden walls. The house was ancient, its floorboards warped from decades of heat and neglect, and every night it groaned like it was alive, whispering stories I was too young to understand. My bedroom was a small, drafty space with a single window overlooking the endless fields, connected by a Jack and Jill bathroom to my older sister Gracie's room. The bathroom door was old, its paint chipped, and the brass doorknob always felt cold under my fingers, no matter the season. I was 9, curious, and easily spooked, but I loved the house despite its oddities, or maybe because of them. One afternoon, I wandered into my parents' bedroom looking for my mother's hairbrush. The door was ajar, and as I stepped inside, I froze. Every doorknob in the room was gone. The closet door, the bathroom door, even the main bedroom door. Just smooth, round holes where the knob should have been. It was unsettling, like the house had been stripped of its ability to open or close properly. I ran to find my father, who was tinkering with something in the garage. "Why are the doorknobs gone?" I asked, my voice high with confusion. He barely looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "They just broke," he said, his tone flat, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I frowned, but didn't press him. Adults always had answers that didn't quite make sense, and at 9, I was used to accepting them. That night, though, everything changed. I was tucked into the bottom bunk of my bed, the glow of my nightlight casting soft shadows on the ceiling. Gracie was in her room, probably reading one of her thick books, the kind with tiny print that made my eyes hurt. The house was quiet except for the usual creaks, the kind you learn to ignore when you live in a place that old. Then, out of nowhere, it started, a sharp, frantic rattling from the bathroom door. The doorknob shook violently, as if someone was twisting it back and forth with all their strength, desperate to get in. The sound was so loud it seemed to vibrate through the walls, straight into my chest. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. "Gracie!" I screamed, clutching my blanket. "Come in, Gracie, stop it!" I was sure it was her, playing a prank to scare me. She was 13, always teasing me about being afraid of the dark. "Gracie, come in, stop doing that!" I yelled again, my voice cracking, but the rattling didn't stop, and no one answered. The knob thrashed harder, the door itself shaking in its frame, the noise growing louder, more insistent. I sat frozen, staring at the door, expecting it to fly open any second. My nightlight flickered, casting jagged shadows that danced across the walls like fingers reaching out. Minutes passed, maybe 5, maybe 10, and the rattling just kept going, relentless. I was shaking, my breath coming in short gasps, but I was too scared to move, too scared to even cry. Finally, exhausted and overwhelmed, I sank back into my pillow, pulling the blanket over my head. The rattling slowed, then stopped, leaving only silence and the pounding of my own heart. The next morning, I stumbled into the kitchen, still shaken. My parents were at the table, sipping coffee and talking in low voices. Gracie was there too, buttering toast, acting like nothing had happened. "Did you hear it last night?" I blurted out, looking at her. "The door? Were you messing with me?" She frowned, confused. "What are you talking about? I was asleep by 9. My stomach twisted. I turned to my parents, who exchanged a quick glance. That's when they told me the truth. They hadn't removed the doorknobs because they were broken. They'd taken them off because something had been rattling them every night, so violently it kept the whole house awake. They thought removing them would stop it, but it hadn't. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The thing I'd been yelling at in the dark wasn't Gracie. It wasn't anyone. From that night on, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching me. The doorknobs were put back eventually, but the rattling didn't stop. It came in waves, unpredictable, and always at night. Sometimes it was the bathroom door, sometimes Gracie's closet, sometimes the front door downstairs. It was never the same door twice in a row, like whatever it was moved through the house, testing every entrance. I started sleeping with my pillow over my head, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The rattling wasn't just noise. It felt alive, like it was trying to tell me something, or worse, trying to get to me. One night, about a week later, it got worse. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when the rattling started again, this time from my own closet door. It was softer at first, almost hesitant, but it grew louder, more aggressive, until the door was shaking so hard I thought it would burst open. I didn't scream this time. I couldn't. My voice was stuck in my throat, and all I could do was stare at the door, my body rigid with fear. The shadows in the room seemed to shift, pooling in the corners like ink, and for a moment I thought I saw something, a shape, tall and thin, standing just behind the door. It wasn't clear, just a flicker in the dim light, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. The rattling stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was worse, heavy and oppressive, like the air itself was holding its breath. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I begged my parents to move my bed to Gracie's room. They refused, saying I was being dramatic. But I could see the unease in their eyes. They heard it too. The rattling, the creaks, the way the house seemed to hum with something unnatural. Gracie started sleeping with her door open, and sometimes I'd catch her staring at the bathroom door in the middle of the night, her face pale. We never talked about it, but we both knew. Something was in the house with us. The incidents kept coming, each one stranger than the last. One night, I woke up to the sound of tapping. Not the violent rattling, but a soft, deliberate knock, like someone rapping their knuckles against the wall behind my bed. It was slow, rhythmic, almost like a code. I lay there, counting the taps, 3, pause, 3, pause, over and over. I wanted to call for my parents, but the thought of moving, of making any sound, terrified me. The tapping went on for what felt like hours, then stopped as suddenly as it had started. When I checked the wall in the morning, there was nothing there. No marks, no holes, nothing to explain it. Another night, I heard footsteps. Not the creaking of the house settling, but actual footsteps, heavy and deliberate, pacing back and forth in the hallway outside my door. They were slow, like whoever or whatever was out there was taking their time, savoring the moment. I pressed my ear to the door, my heart racing, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. The footsteps stopped right outside my room, and then impossibly, the doorknob started to turn. Not rattle, not shake, just turn, slow and smooth, like someone was testing it. I backed away, my breath hitching, and watched as the knob twisted back and forth, never quite opening the door. When it stopped, I heard a single, soft knock, then nothing. The worst came a month later. I was alone in the house. My parents had gone to a neighbor's, and Gracie was at a friend's house. I was in the living room, curled up with a book, trying to ignore the way the house felt too big, too empty. The sun had just set, and the shadows were stretching long across the floor. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural hum, like the house itself was vibrating. It wasn't coming from any one place. It was everywhere, in the walls, the floor, the air. I dropped my book and stood, my legs trembling. The hum grew louder, and then the rattling started. Not just one door, but all of them. Every door in the house, bedroom, bathroom, closet, front door, was shaking, the knobs twisting frantically like a dozen invisible hands were trying to break in at once. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and backed into a corner, my eyes darting from door to door. The hum turned into a low growl, and the air felt thick, like I was breathing through a blanket. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The house was silent again, but I stayed in that corner until my parents came home, the knife clutched in my shaking hands. We moved a few months later. My parents never admitted why, but I knew the house was wrong, alive in a way it shouldn't have been. Even now, years later, I can't sleep in a room with a closed door. Every creak, every tap, every shadow in the corner of my eye feels like that house, reaching out, trying to pull me back. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I hear it, a faint, persistent rattling, like a doorknob that won't stay still. Story 3, The Vanishing Shadows. My name is Ethan, and I was 12 when I first heard the tale that would haunt me for years. It was a sweltering summer night at Camp Wilderness, deep in the Florida Everglades, where the air clung to your skin like damp cloth. The campfire crackled as our counselor, Mr. Hargrove, leaned forward, his voice low and gravelly, weaving the legend of the Witch of the Kitchen. I remember the way his words slithered into my ears, planting a seed of dread that would grow with every passing day. I was one of the younger kids at camp, scrawny and quiet, always trailing behind the louder, brasher boys. Camp Wilderness was supposed to be my chance to fit in, to prove I wasn't just the kid who flinched at shadows. But that night, as the story unfolded, I felt the weight of something far heavier than peer pressure. The tale was about an old cook, a woman with a face like crumpled leather, who worked in the camp's original dining hall decades ago. She was kind, they said, but her stern glare and sharp tongue made her an easy target for the campers' cruelty. They'd mock her, steal her utensils, and whisper taunts behind her back. One night, A fire consumed the dining hall. The kids escaped, but she didn't. The official report called it an accident, a faulty stove, a spark. But the whispers told a different story. The next morning, 3 boys who'd been particularly vicious to her woke to find polished metal spoons under their pillows. They laughed, thinking it was a prank. By nightfall, they were gone. No footprints, no cries, no trace. The lake was dragged, the woods scoured, but it was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. The spoons, though, remained, gleaming, untouched, a silent warning. Hargrove's voice dropped to a whisper as he finished. Some say she's still here, watching, and if you're cruel, she'll find you. The other boys scoffed, their bravado louder than the crickets chirping in the dark. But I couldn't shake the chill. I lay in my tent that night, staring at the canvas ceiling, imagining those spoons glinting in the moonlight. I wasn't a bully, but I wasn't innocent either. I'd laughed along with the others, hadn't I? Watched as they teased the weaker kids, never saying a word. Did that make me complicit? I didn't know. All I knew was that the air felt heavier, like something was waiting just beyond the tent flaps. The first strange thing happened the next morning. I was brushing my teeth at the communal sinks when I noticed my reflection in the cracked mirror. It flickered, not like a glitch, but like something moved behind my eyes. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was the heat, the lack of sleep, but my hand shook as I rinsed my toothbrush. That afternoon, during archery practice, I overheard 2 older boys, Jake and Connor, plotting to scare a kid named Timmy, a nervous boy with glasses who always carried a dog-eared comic book. They were going to sneak into his tent and dump a bucket of lake water on him while he slept. I wanted to warn Timmy, but my courage faltered. I stayed silent, just like always. That night, I couldn't sleep. The swamp outside our tents buzzed with life, frogs croaking, insects humming, but there was another sound, faint and rhythmic, like metal tapping against metal. I sat up, heart pounding, and peeked through the tent's mesh window. The moon hung low, casting long shadows across the campground, and then I saw it, a glint, sharp and silver, near the edge of the woods. It moved, bobbing slightly like someone was holding it. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The tapping stopped, and the glint vanished. I told myself it was nothing, just a trick of the light. But when I checked under my pillow, compelled by some irrational urge, my fingers brushed something cold and smooth. A spoon, polished, heavy, its surface reflecting the dim glow of my flashlight. I dropped it, like it burned. The next morning, Jake and Connor were acting strange. They were quieter, their usual swagger replaced by darting glances and hushed whispers. I overheard Connor muttering about a weird dream where he saw an old woman standing at the foot of his bed holding a tray of spoons. Jake laughed it off, but his eyes were wide, nervous. I didn't tell him about the spoon I'd found. I'd hidden it in my backpack, too scared to show anyone. That day, Timmy was jumpy, clutching his comic book like a shield. I wanted to ask if he was okay, but every time I opened my mouth, the memory of that spoon choked the words. By the third night, things got worse. We were on a group hike through the swamp, our flashlights cutting through the dense, humid air. Jake and Connor lagged behind, whispering. I overheard them talking about Timmy again. Something about hiding his comic book to teach him a lesson. My stomach twisted, but I kept walking, my flashlight beam trembling on the path. That's when I heard it again, The metallic tapping, faint but unmistakable, coming from the trees. I stopped, shining my light into the underbrush. Nothing, just vines and shadows. But when I turned back, Jake and Connor were gone. 1 second they were there, the next, nothing. No sound, no movement, just the swamp, swallowing their absence. The counselors noticed their absence at roll call. Search parties fanned out, their voices echoing through the night. I stayed in my tent, clutching the spoon I'd found, its weight grounding me, even as my mind spiraled. Had they gone through with their prank? Had something taken them? The other boys whispered about alligators or quicksand, but I knew Hannah's eyes were on the spoon in my hand, glinting like it knew something I didn't. The next day, the camp was in chaos. Counselors tried to keep us calm, but the air felt electric, charged with fear. Timmy was inconsolable, muttering about his missing comic book. I wanted to comfort him, but guilt gnawed at me. I'd known about the prank and done nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep again. The tapping sound returned, louder this time, closer. I checked under my pillow, another spoon. This one was different, older, with a faint engraving of a flame on the handle. I hit it with the first, my hands trembling. Over the next few days, the disappearances continued. Another boy, Ryan, who'd once tripped Timmy during a game of Capture the Flag, didn't show up for breakfast. His bunk was empty, except for a single spoon placed neatly on his pillow. The counselors called it a prank, but their voices wavered. The camp felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the next blow. I started noticing things, shadows that moved too slowly, reflections in the lake that didn't match the faces above it. Every night, I checked under my pillow, dreading what I'd find. By the 5th night, there were 3 spoons in my backpack, each one heavier than the last. I finally worked up the nerve to talk to Timmy. He was sitting by the lake, staring at the water. "They took it," he whispered, not looking at me. "My comic book. It's gone." His voice was hollow, his eyes distant. I tried to apologize, to explain I'd wanted to warn him, but he just shook his head. "You knew," he said, and walked away. That night, the tapping was so loud it felt like it was inside my skull. I didn't check under my pillow. I didn't need to. I could feel the spoon's presence, cold and accusing. The camp closed early that summer. The official story was that Jake, Connor, and Ryan had run away, maybe hitched a ride out of the Everglades, but I knew better. The spoons in my backpack felt like anchors, pulling me toward something I couldn't name. I threw them into the lake on the last day, watching them sink into the murky water. But the tapping didn't stop. It followed me home. Years later, I'm still haunted. The spoons reappear under my pillow, in my desk drawer, on my kitchen counter, always polished, always cold. Sometimes I see her in my dreams, an old woman with a face like crumpled leather, holding a tray of spoons, her eyes burning with quiet rage. I'm not a bully anymore. I try to be kind, to make up for the silence of that summer, but every so often I hear it, the faint, rhythmic tapping of metal on metal, reminding me that some debts can never be paid. Story 4. Possession at the village bridge. When I was 9, our small village house in rural India was my playground, a place of endless games and carefree laughter. It was a simple home, mud walls and a thatched roof, nestled among green fields and dusty paths that wound toward the river. The world felt safe, predictable, until one ordinary afternoon shattered that illusion forever. It started with my mother. She'd been unwell for days, a low fever and a tiredness that clung to her like damp cloth. I was playing with a pile of stones in the corner of our living room, stacking them into wobbly towers, when a strange sound broke my focus. A low, guttural growl like an animal caught in a trap. I looked up, and there was Mama, standing in the center of the room, her eyes wide and unseeing. Her body jerked violently, and she collapsed to the floor, shaking as if caught in a storm only she could feel. Her voice, oh, that voice, wasn't hers. It was loud, jagged, almost snarling, spitting words I couldn't understand. It wasn't my mother's soft, familiar tone. It was something else, something wrong. I froze, my stones tumbling to the ground. My grandmother rushed in from the kitchen, her hands still dusted with flour. Neighbors appeared at the door, drawn by the noise. They crowded around Mama, their faces pale, whispering to each other in low, urgent tones. Someone reached out, trying to hold her still, but her body writhed, her arms flailing like they were no longer her own. I wanted to run to her, to call her back, but my legs wouldn't move. I wasn't scared of her, not yet. I was scared for her. Where was my mama? Who was this stranger wearing her face? The episode lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. When it stopped, Mama lay still, her breathing shallow, her face slick with sweat. My grandmother knelt beside her, murmuring softly, her hands trembling as she brushed hair from Mama's forehead. The neighbors lingered, their eyes darting to the corners of the room as if expecting something to leap from the shadows. Nobody spoke to me, but I heard their whispers as they left. The bridge. It's the bridge again. In the days that followed, the story took shape, pieced together from the hushed conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. Years ago, before I was born, Mama had been in an accident. She'd been crossing the old stone bridge over the river, a narrow, crumbling thing that connected our village to the town beyond. She'd tripped, or maybe the wind had pushed her, and she'd fallen, her body striking the rocks below. She survived, battered but alive, and my father had brought her home. But the villagers said something else had come back with her. They spoke of 7 women, all strangers to our village, who had leapt from that bridge in years past. Their lives ended in the cold, rushing water below. Their reasons were lost to time. Grief, shame, despair. But their restless spirits, the villagers said, lingered at the bridge, waiting for someone to claim. And then there was the older story, one my grandmother barely dared to speak. My mother's uncle, a man I'd never met, had died years before, his body wasted by illness. He'd been close to Mama, almost a second father, but his death had been slow and painful. Some said his spirit never left, that it clung to our family, wandering the edges of our lives. The villagers believed Mama's fall on the bridge had opened a door, letting these unseen forces, whether the women or the uncle or something else entirely, slip into her. I didn't understand it then, but I felt the weight of their words. Our house, once warm and familiar, now seemed to hum with an unseen presence. At night, I'd lie awake, listening to the creak of the roof, the rustle of leaves outside, wondering if they were just the wind or something more. Mama recovered slowly, but she was different, quieter, her eyes always searching the room as if she, too, sensed something watching. Weeks passed, and I thought maybe it was over. But then it happened again. I was outside kicking a ball against the wall when a scream tore through the air. I ran inside to find Mama on the kitchen floor, her body convulsing, that same horrible voice spilling from her lips. This time, it wasn't just sounds, it was words, sharp and angry, demanding something I couldn't comprehend. My grandmother tried to hold her, but Mama's strength was unnatural, her arms pushing back with a force that didn't belong to her frail body. I backed away, my heart pounding, till I hit the wall. The air felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on me. When it stopped, Mama was exhausted, barely able to sit up. My father carried her to bed, his face etched with worry. The neighbors came again, their whispers louder now, their eyes fixed on the path to the bridge. They didn't stay long, but their fear lingered, seeping into the walls. That night, I overheard my father and grandmother talking in low voices. "It's getting worse," my father said. "We can't stay here." But we had nowhere else to go. This was our home. The third time it happened, I was alone with her. It was dusk, the sky bruised with purple, and I was helping Mama shell peas. She was humming softly, a rare moment of normalcy, when her hands froze. The bowl slipped from her lap, peas scattering across the floor. Her eyes rolled back, and that voice, low, guttural, not hers, growled, "You can't keep us out." I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. Her body jerked, her fingers clawing at the air, and I ran outside, screaming for help. By the time my grandmother returned, Mama was still, her face pale as bone. But this time, something was different. Her eyes, when they opened, weren't just tired. They were afraid. I started avoiding her. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't look at her without seeing that thing, that presence that stole her voice and twisted her body. I stopped playing in the house, spending my days wandering the fields, steering clear of the path to the bridge. But the bridge called to me, too. I'd catch myself staring at it from a distance, its weathered stones glowing faintly in the moonlight. I wondered what it was about that place, what made it a magnet for lost souls. One night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the silence unnatural. I crept to the window and looked out, my breath fogging the glass. In the distance I saw it, a figure, pale and indistinct, standing at the edge of our yard. It wasn't Mama, but it wasn't a stranger either. It was tall, its shape shifting like smoke, and it was watching the house. I blinked, and it was gone, but my heart wouldn't stop racing. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe a 9-year-old boy? The final incident came months later. It was late, the village asleep under a heavy moon. I woke to a sound like scratching, faint but persistent, coming from the walls. I thought it was rats at first, but it grew louder, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging across wood. I sat up, my skin prickling, and saw Mama standing in the doorway of my room. Her eyes were wrong, empty, like pools of black ink. She didn't move, didn't speak, but that voice came again, low and menacing. "We're still here," I screamed, and my father burst in, pulling her away. She collapsed in his arms, her body limp, and the scratching stopped. The next morning, my father made a decision. We packed what little we had and left the village, moving to a small house in a neighboring town. The new place was cramped, the walls thin, but it was quiet. Mama never had another episode, but she was never the same either. She moved slowly, spoke less, and sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, she'd stare out the window toward the direction of the old village, as if waiting for something to follow us. Years later, I went back to the bridge. I was older, braver, or maybe just foolish. It was smaller than I remembered, just a crumbling arc of stone over a sluggish river. I stood at its center, the wind cold against my face, and waited. Nothing happened. No voices, no figures, no chill in my bones. But as I turned to leave, I heard it. A faint whisper, not in my ears, but in my mind, like a memory that wasn't mine. We're still here. I never went back. The village is gone now, swallowed by time and progress, the bridge replaced by a concrete overpass. But I carry that house, that moment, that voice with me. I see Mama's face, twisted by something I'll never understand, and I wonder if those spirits are still out there, waiting at some other bridge, some other house, for someone new to claim. Story 5. Halia Reed's Revenge. The wind howled through the skeletal trees lining the deserted streets of Coldwater, Ohio, a town that clung to its secrets like frost to a window pane. My name is Halia Reed, and I am no longer of this world. My voice carries from the shadows where the living dare not linger. I was 19 when they found my body at the bottom of Lake Erie, my lungs filled with its icy water, my wrists bruised, my life stolen. The newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle, still whispers my story to anyone who dares to read it under the dim glow of a lamp. But the words on the page are not enough. I will tell you the truth. I will tell you of my revenge. It began in the autumn of my 19th year, when the leaves bled red and gold and the air grew sharp with the promise of winter. Coldwater was a small place, its people bound by whispers and grudges, their smiles hiding sharp edges. I was a quiet girl, too trusting, with dreams of leaving for a city where no one knew my name. But dreams are fragile, and in Coldwater they were crushed under the weight of envy and malice. There was a man named Elias Crow, the town's blacksmith, whose hands were as cruel as the iron he forged. His daughter Clara was my closest friend, or so I thought. She had a laugh like a bell, clear and bright, but her eyes held a flicker of something darker. Clara's mother had died years before, and Elias ruled their home with a heavy hand. I pitied her, spent evenings by her side, sharing secrets under the stars. I didn't see the resentment building in her, the way her gaze lingered on my untouched dreams, my hope for escape. I didn't know she'd betray me. It was a late October night when the first event unfolded. I'd been walking home from the milliner's shop where I worked, stitching hats for women who'd never looked me in the eye. The path wound past the lake, its surface a mirror for the moon's pale light. Clara had asked me to meet her there, said she needed to talk, her voice trembling through a note slipped under my door. I thought she was in trouble, that Elias had hurt her again. I went without hesitation. The lake was silent when I arrived, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. Clara stood by the water's edge, her shawl pulled tight against the chill. "Halia," she said, her voice soft, almost lost in the wind. "I'm sorry." Before I could ask why, hands seized me from behind, rough, calloused hands that smelled of soot and metal. Elias. His grip was iron, pinning my arms as I thrashed. Clara didn't move, didn't scream, didn't help. She just watched, her face blank, as if she'd carved out her own heart. They dragged me to the water. I fought, clawed at Elias's arms, screamed until my throat burned, but the lake swallowed my cries, and Clara's eyes never left mine as they forced me under. The cold was a blade, slicing through skin and bone, filling my chest with liquid fire. My last breath was a bubble, rising to a surface I'd never reach. They thought they'd silenced me. They were wrong. Death didn't end me. It unbound me. I lingered in the lake's depths, my spirit tethered to the place where my life was stolen. Time blurred, days bleeding into nights, but my anger grew sharp, a blade honed by betrayal. I saw Clara return to the lake, her face pale, her hands trembling as she tossed my shawl into the water, erasing the last trace of me. I saw Elias, his shoulders hunched, avoiding the lake's edge as if he could outrun his guilt. They thought they'd won. They didn't know I was watching. My first act of revenge came on a night when the moon hung low, its light casting long shadows across cold water. Clara was alone in her father's forge, sweeping ash from the floor. The air grew cold, the fire in the hearth flickering as if afraid. I let her feel me first, a brush of icy air against her neck, a whisper of her name in the dark. She froze, broom clattering to the ground, her eyes darting to the shadows. "Halia," she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't answer with words. I let the forge tools move, hammers lifting from their racks, tongs scraping across the stone floor. She screamed, stumbling back, her hands raised as if to ward me off. The fire flared, unnatural and blue, and in its light she saw me, my pale face, my dripping hair, my eyes burning with the rage of the betrayed. "You did this," I hissed, my voice echoing inside her skull. She ran, tripping over her own feet, out into the night. But there was no escape. I followed, my presence a weight she couldn't shake. For weeks I haunted her. Shadows moved in her peripheral vision. Her reflection in the mirror wasn't always her own. At night, she woke to the sound of water dripping, though her room was dry. Clara stopped eating, stopped speaking, her once bright laugh replaced by a hollow silence. The town whispered of her madness, but I knew the truth. Guilt was a poison, and I was its vessel. Elias was next. He was a man of brute strength, unafraid of the dark, or so he thought. I came to him in the forge, where the air was thick with heat and the clang of metal. I made the bellows hiss without touch, the coals glow red without fuel. He dropped his hammer, his face pale, muttering to himself as he backed away. "You're dead," he growled, as if saying it could make it true. But I was there, my form flickering in the heat haze, my voice a blade in his ear. "You held me under," I said. "You drowned me." He tried to run, but the forge door wouldn't open. The windows frosted over, though it was still autumn. I let him see me fully then, my bloated skin, my lifeless eyes, my fingers reaching for him. He screamed, a sound raw and animal, and collapsed, clutching his chest. The town found him the next morning, alive but broken, his eyes wide with terror, unable to speak. They said it was a fit, a stroke of bad luck. I knew better. But Clara and Elias weren't the only ones. There was Margaret, the milliner's wife, who'd spread lies about me, calling me a thief to cover her own greed. She'd turned the town against me, made it easier for Clara to betray me, for Elias to act without question. I found her in her shop, surrounded by ribbons and lace, her fingers nimble as she worked. I made the scissors snap shut on their own, inches from her hand. I made the mirrors show my face instead of hers. She fled the shop, screaming, and never returned. The townsfolk said she'd lost her mind, but I saw the truth in her eyes. She knew why I'd come. One by one, I visited those who'd wronged me. The baker who'd turned me away when I begged for work. his ovens now burning his bread to ash, the school teacher who'd mocked my dreams now waking to find her books open to pages dripping with lake water. Each felt my presence, my anger, my promise. I will find you, I whispered to each, and I will punish. The town changed as winter tightened its grip. People locked their doors, avoided the lake, spoke in hushed tones of a curse. They didn't know it was me, but they felt the weight of my vengeance. Cold water became a place of fear, its streets empty by dusk, its air heavy with secrets no one dared voice. Clara was the last. She'd fled to the edge of town, hiding in a crumbling barn as if distance could save her. I found her there, curled in a corner, her eyes red from crying. The air grew thick, the shadows deeper as I let her see me one final time. "Why?" I asked, my voice a storm of rage and pain. "Why did you let them kill me?" she sobbed, her words choking out. "I was jealous," she whispered. "You were going to leave and I'd be stuck here with him. I thought it would make me free." Her confession was a knife, twisting in the space where my heart once beat. I wanted to forgive her, to let go of the anger that bound me, but I couldn't. She'd taken everything, my life, my dreams, my future. I stepped closer, my form dissolving into mist, wrapping around her like the lake's cold embrace. "You'll never be free," I said, my voice soft but final. She screamed, but no one heard. By morning, the barn was empty, Clara gone without a trace. The town searched, whispered, wondered, but I knew where she was. The lake had claimed her as it had claimed me. I linger still, my spirit tied to cold water, to the lake that holds my bones. The town is quieter now, its people wary, their eyes darting to shadows. I watch, I wait, my anger sated but not gone. If you walk by Lake Erie at night, when the moon is high and the air is still, you might hear me, a whisper in the wind, a ripple on the water. My name is Halia Reed, and I am not at rest. For those who wrong me, for those who betray, I will always be waiting. Story 6. The Night Scratches. I'm Elaine, and I've never been one to scare easily. Growing up in our creaky old house on the edge of town, I'd heard every groan of the floorboards and whistle of the wind through the eaves. But nothing prepared me for that sweltering summer night when the world turned upside down. It started with a dream, or at least I thought it was a dream, a skeletal figure, all jagged edges and hollow eyes, crashed through my bedroom window. Its bony fingers raked across my throat, leaving a burning sting. I jolted awake, my heart hammering, sweat plastering my hair to my forehead. The air was thick, oppressive, like breathing through a damp cloth. I fumbled for the flashlight on my nightstand, its beam cutting through the dark as I stumbled to the bathroom. In the mirror, I froze. 3 raised, bloody scratches stretched across my chest just below my collarbone. They weren't deep, but they were fresh, the skin around them angry and red. My breath caught. Had I clawed myself in my sleep? I pressed my fingers to the wounds, wincing at the sting. No, these were too precise, too deliberate. My mind flashed back to the dream, the figure, the nails, the shattering glass. But my window was intact, the latch secure. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. Then I heard it, a soft crack from the direction of my bedroom window. I crept back, flashlight trembling in my grip. The sound grew louder, more insistent, like something sharp dragging across the glass. Not insects, not branches, something deliberate. My pulse thundered in my ears. I pressed my face close to the window, peering into the inky night. The backyard was still, the old oak tree motionless under the moon's pale glow. But the scratching didn't stop. It was rhythmic, hungry, like whatever was out there was testing the glass, looking for a way in. I didn't think. I just ran. My bare feet slapped against the cold hardwood as I bolted down the hall to my younger brother's room. Robert was only 12, small for his age, but fearless in a way I'd never been. His room was a fortress of childhood imagination. Makeshift armor crafted from cardboard, wooden swords leaning against the wall from our afternoon spent battling imaginary monsters in the backyard. I shook him awake, my voice barely a whisper. "Robert, something's in my room." His eyes snapped open, instantly alert. "What do you mean, something?" he asked, already reaching for the flashlight tucked under his pillow. Before I could answer, the scratching started again, this time at his window. We both froze, staring at the glass. The sound was sharper now, more aggressive, like nails clawing at the frame. Then came a new noise, a low, guttural hum, almost like a growl, vibrating through the walls. The vent grate outside his window rattled violently as if something was trying to tear it free. From beyond it came a sound that made my blood run cold. Distant screams, faint but unmistakable, carried on a howling wind that shouldn't have existed on such a still night. Robert grabbed one of his wooden swords, his knuckles white. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. I clutched the flashlight, its beam shaking as I aimed it at the window. The house seemed to come alive around us. Doors rattled on the hinges, creaking as if pushed by invisible hands. The windows, every window, began to tremble with 1,000 tiny taps, like claws skittering across the glass. The air grew heavier, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. It wasn't just one thing outside. It was many. "We need to move," I whispered, grabbing Robert's arm. We bolted down the hall, the sounds chasing us, scratching, tapping, that awful humming growing louder. The kitchen was the only place that felt safe, grounded by the familiar hum of the refrigerator and the gleam of the moonlight through the back door's glass panel. I snatched a butcher knife from the block on the counter, its weight reassuring in my hand. Robert grabbed a rolling pin, brandishing it like a club. We stood back to back, listening, waiting. The noises stopped. Just like that, the house fell silent. No scratching, no tapping, no screams, just the sound of our ragged breathing. I glanced at Robert, his eyes wide but determined. "What now?" he whispered. I didn't know. My chest throbbed where the scratches burned, a reminder that this wasn't just in my head. "We checked the house," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. We moved together, flashlights cutting through the dark, checking every room, every window. Everything was locked, undisturbed, but the air felt wrong. Too still, too heavy, like the house was holding its breath. Then it started again. A single scratch, slow and deliberate, from the back door. We spun toward the sound, my knife raised, Robert's rolling pin ready. The glass panel in the door rattled, the scratching growing faster, more frantic. I could see nothing beyond the glass, just darkness, but I felt it. Something watching, waiting, wanting in. Robert took a step forward, his jaw set. "We can't just stand here," he said. Before I could stop him, he flung open the back door. The world stopped. The scratching, the rattling, the humming, all of it vanished. The night outside was calm, the air cool against my sweat-soaked skin. The backyard was empty, the grass silver under the moonlight. Robert and I stood frozen, waiting for something to lunge at us, but nothing came, just silence, deafening and absolute. We exchanged a glance, our breaths shaky. Robert let out a nervous laugh, and I couldn't help but join him, the sound brittle in the quiet. "That was weird," he said, locking the door with a quick twist of his wrist. "I'm staying with you tonight." We dragged blankets and pillows to my room, piling them on the floor like a fortress. Robert kept his sword close, and I kept the knife under my pillow. We didn't sleep, not really. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside made us jump. But nothing came. The scratches didn't return that night. Morning came, pale and gray, the terror of the night before fading like a bad dream. But the scratches on my chest were still there, red and raw, proof that something had happened. Robert and I didn't talk about it much after that, but we both knew we'd face something we couldn't explain. The house felt different in the days that followed, like it was watching us, waiting. The creaks and groans were louder, more frequent, but nothing ever matched the intensity of that night. Weeks passed, and the memory of the scratches began to blur, though the marks on my chest took longer to fade. Robert and I stuck closer together, our pretend battles in the backyard taking on a new edge, our wooden swords swinging with more purpose. We never heard the screams again, never felt the house shake with that unnatural wind. But sometimes, late at night, I'd lie awake, listening for that telltale caw at the window. It never came. But I knew, deep down, in a place I couldn't name, that whatever had been outside that night wasn't gone. It was just waiting. The next event came a month later, on a night when the air was crisp with the first bite of autumn. I was alone in the house. Robert was at a friend's, and our parents were out of town. I'd almost convinced myself the summer night was a fluke, a shared hallucination born of heat and fear. But as I sat in the living room, the lights flickered, not once, but 3 times, each pause longer than the last. The air grew heavy again like it had that night, and I felt that same prickle of being watched. Then I heard it, a single deliberate scratch from the front door. My heart stopped. I grabbed the butcher knife from the kitchen, my hand shaking as I approached the door. The scratching grew louder, joined by a low hum that vibrated through the floorboards. I peered through the peephole, but the porch was empty, the streetlights casting long shadows across the lawn. The sound stopped, and for a moment I thought it was over. Then the windows started. Every window in the house rattled at once, a cacophony of claw taps that made my skin crawl. I backed away from the door, knife raised, my eyes darting to every corner of the room. The humming grew louder, morphing into that same guttural growl I'd heard before. The air felt alive, pressing against me, suffocating. I ran to my room, slamming the door shut, and wedged a chair under the handle. The scratching followed me, now at my window, slow and deliberate, like it was toying with me. I don't know how long I sat there, curled up on my bed, knife in hand, listening to the sounds circle the house. They'd stop for minutes at a time, only to start again somewhere else. First the kitchen, then the back door, then Robert's room. It was like the thing, whatever it was mapping the house, looking for a weak point. When the first light of dawn broke through the curtains, the noises stopped. I waited, heart pounding, until the sun was fully up before I dared to move. The house was silent, but the scratches on my chest burned faintly, as if reminding me they were still there. I checked every window, every door. Nothing was out of place, no sign of forced entry. But I knew it wasn't over. That thing was still out there, biding its time. The third event came in early winter, when snow blanketed the ground and the house felt like a tomb. Robert and I were both home, playing cards in the kitchen to pass the time. The lights flickered again, and we froze, exchanging a look. We didn't need to say it. We both knew what was coming. The scratching started at the back door, slow and deliberate, followed by that awful hum. The windows rattled, harder this time, the glass vibrating so violently I thought it might shatter. Robert grabbed his wooden sword, and I snatched the knife. We moved as a unit, checking the locks, barricading the doors with chairs. The noises grew louder, more aggressive, the hum turning into a low, guttural snarl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The vent grates rattled, and those distant screams returned, faint but chilling, carried on a wind that howled despite the still night outside. We huddled in the living room, weapons in hand, as the house shook around us. The scratching was relentless now, circling the house, testing every entry point. I could feel it, whatever it was, pressing closer, its presence heavy in the air. Robert's eyes were wide, but he didn't waver. "We're not letting it in," he said, his voice fierce. The night stretched on, the noises growing louder, then softer, then louder again, like waves crashing against us. We stayed awake, watching, waiting, until the first light of dawn silenced the house once more. We checked every inch of the place, but as always, there was nothing. No tracks in the snow, no marks on the windows, no sign of anything. That was the last time it came so close, but the house never felt the same. The creaks were louder, the shadows darker. Robert and I stopped playing our pretend battles, our wooden swords gathering dust. We didn't talk about it, but we both knew we were waiting, always waiting, for the next time the scratches would come. Story 7. The Shadow of Fred. When I was 6, I met Fred. He wasn't like the other kids in my neighborhood, with their sticky fingers and loud games of tag. Fred was different, quiet, always smiling, and dressed in a way that made him seem like he'd stepped out of a storybook. His purple top hat tilted slightly to one side, and his green suit shimmered faintly, even in the dull light of my bedroom. I don't remember when I first saw him, only that one day he was there, sitting cross-legged on my rug, watching me with eyes that sparkled like polished glass. "Hello," he said, his voice soft as a whisper. "I'm Fred. Want to play?" My parents were always working, their footsteps echoing out the door before dawn and not returning until the house was dark. I was alone most days, rattling around our creaky old home with its peeling wallpaper and drafty windows. Fred filled the emptiness. We had tea parties with cracked porcelain cups, played hide-and-seek in the attic, and whispered secrets under the kitchen table. He never got bored, never argued, and his smile never faltered. I loved him for that. He was my best friend, my only friend. But there were moments, small, fleeting ones, where something about Fred felt off. Like the time I dropped my favorite teacup and it shattered across the floor. I cried, expecting him to comfort me, but he just tilted his head, his smile wider than usual, and said, "Things break. It's fine." His voice was too calm, too hollow. I brushed it off. Kids imagine strange things, don't they? School was harder. I was shy, awkward, with pigtails that seemed to invite trouble. Jenny Dorner, a girl with a sharp tongue and sharper fists, made me her favorite target. One spring afternoon, she cornered me by the swings, her friends giggling as she yanked my hair until tears streamed down my face. I ran home, sobbing, and told Fred everything. His smile faded for the first time, his eyes narrowing. "I'll come with you tomorrow," he said, his voice low. "I'll make sure she leaves you alone." The next day, Fred followed me to school. I couldn't see him, but I felt him, a cool, weightless presence at my side. At recess, Jenny was on the monkey bars laughing as she swung above the other kids. I stood nearby, clutching the straps of my backpack when it happened. Jenny's hands slipped, or something made them slip. She fell hard, her scream piercing the air as she hit the ground. Her arm twisted beneath her at an angle that made my stomach lurch. Kid gasped, teachers rushed over, and Jenny's friends shouted that she'd been pushed. I froze, my eyes darting to the monkey bars. There was Fred, standing alone, his purple hat stark against the gray sky. His grin was wider than I'd ever seen, sharp and wrong, like a crack in a mirror. I ran to help Jenny, but her friends shoved me back, their accusations ringing in my ears. "You did this!" they screamed. I didn't. I couldn't have. But Fred's smile stayed with me, cold and heavy, long after the ambulance took Jenny away. That summer, things got worse. The neighborhood was quiet, the air thick with heat and the hum of cicadas. Fred and I spent our days digging in the front yard, pretending to hunt for buried treasure. One afternoon, as I scraped dirt with a plastic shovel, a low growl snapped my attention. The neighbor's pit bull, a beast with a chain-link scar across its muzzle, had broken free. It charged. Teeth bared, its eyes locked on me. I screamed, dropping the shovel, and ran. The dog was faster, its hot breath grazing my heels as I stumbled into the street. Tires screeched. A car swerved around the corner, slamming into the dog with a sickening thud. I tripped, falling to my knees, my heart pounding as I turned to see the dog's crumpled body in the road, blood pooling beneath it. The driver leapt out, yelling, but I barely heard him. My eyes found Fred. He stood by the wrecked car, his suit untouched by the dust, watching me with that same jagged grin. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stared, and I swear I saw amusement flicker in his eyes. I stopped talking about Fred after that. My parents, when they were home, dismissed him as a childish phase. "You're too old for imaginary friends," my mom said, her voice tired. But Fred wasn't imaginary, not to me. He was real, and he was changing. His smile, once warm, now felt like a warning. His laughter, once playful, carried an edge that made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore him, to focus on school, on books, on anything else. But he was always there, lurking in the corner of my vision, his hat tilting just so. By the time I was 13, Fred had grown quiet. He didn't talk much anymore, just watched me from the shadows of my room at night. I'd catch glimpses of him in the moonlight, his green suit blending into the darkness, his eyes glinting like coins. I started sleeping with the lights on, but it didn't help. One morning, I woke to a sharp, stinging pain. My thighs and stomach were covered in deep, jagged cuts, blood crusted around the edges like rust. I gasped, pulling the sheets tight, my hands shaking as I traced the wounds. They weren't random scratches. These were precise, deliberate, like someone had carved me with care. I had no memory of how they got there, no explanation. But I knew. I felt Fred's presence in the room, heavy and suffocating, even though I couldn't see him. I hid the cuts under long sleeves and jeans, lying to my parents about scrapes from a fall. The dread grew, a cold knot in my chest that tightened every night. Then came the dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream. I woke, or thought I woke, chained to my bed, my wrists and ankles bound by something cold and unyielding. The room was dark, but I could smell baby powder, sharp and cloying, filling the air. Fred stood at the foot of my bed, his hat casting a long shadow across the wall. His smile was gone, replaced by a blank, unreadable expression. He held a small glinting blade, its edge catching the faint light. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat, trapped like a bird in a cage. He leaned closer, his movements slow and deliberate, and began to cut. Tiny, precise incisions, each one burning like fire. I couldn't move, couldn't fight, could only watch as he peeled away slivers of my skin, his eyes locked on mine. He lifted a piece to his mouth, chewing slowly, savoring it. The sound, soft, wet, deliberate, made my stomach heave. I blacked out, the smell of baby powder choking me as the world faded. When I woke, the chains were gone, but the cuts were real, fresh and bleeding. I stumbled to the bathroom, vomiting into the sink, my reflection pale and hollow in the mirror. Fred was behind me just for a moment, his grin back in place. I screamed, slamming the door shut, and spent the rest of the night curled up on the bathroom floor, shaking. I stopped sleeping in my room after that. I'd sneak to the couch, the kitchen, anywhere but that bed. Fred didn't follow, or at least I didn't see him, but I felt him, always. I moved out the moment I turned 18, leaving that house and its shadows behind. I cut ties with the little girl who loved tea parties, who trusted a friend in a purple hat. I built a new life, one where I could pretend Fred was just a memory, a nightmare I'd outgrown. But some nights, in my new apartment, I hear it, a faint, familiar laugh, low and mocking, echoing through the empty rooms. I check the locks, close the curtains, but it doesn't help. In every shadow, I see the outline of his top hat, tilting just so. In every silence, I feel his eyes watching, waiting. I don't sleep much anymore. I can't. Because I know deep down that Fred never left. He's still here, smiling, and some friends once made never truly say goodbye. Story 8. The Haunted Doll. My name is Lucy, and when I was 11, I found something in my grandmother's attic that changed me forever. It was a Raggedy Ann doll, tucked away in a dusty corner of that creaky Victorian house, half buried under moth-eaten blankets. Its red yarn hair was frayed, its glossy black eyes glinted in the dim light, and its stitched smile seemed too lifelike, too knowing. I brushed off the unease that prickled my skin, chalking it up to childish imagination, and carried the doll to my bedroom. It felt heavier than it should have, like it was resisting being moved. I set it on my nightstand, its head tilted slightly, as if watching me. That night, I woke to the sound of soft footsteps on the hardwood floor. My room was dark, save for the faint glow of a street lamp filtering through the curtains. I sat up, heart pounding, and scanned the room. The doll was gone. My eyes darted to the dresser, where a crumpled piece of paper lay, paper that had been blank when I went to sleep. I crept over, my bare feet cold against the floor, and picked it up. In shaky, uneven handwriting it read, "Help me." My breath caught. I spun around, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the room was empty. Just me and that missing doll. I barely slept after that. By morning, more notes had appeared. One was pinned to the wall above my bed, another stuffed inside my dresser drawer. One even drifted down from the ceiling as I stared wide-eyed, clutching my blanket. Each bore the same plea. Help me. I told myself it was a prank. Maybe my older brother sneaking in to scare me, but he was away at camp, and my parents were asleep downstairs. The doll I found was back on the nightstand, its head now tilted the other way, its smile seeming wider, sharper. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I carried the doll back to the attic, hoping distance would quiet my nerves. But when I returned to my room, it was sitting on my bed, upright, its legs crossed like it had posed itself. I froze. My hand shook as I shoved it into a drawer, slamming it shut. That night, the footsteps returned, louder, closer. I lay still, pretending to sleep as the drawer creaked open. In the morning, the doll was on my pillow, inches from my face, its eyes locked on mine. I told my parents, my voice trembling as I showed them the notes. My mother frowned, assuming I'd written them myself, maybe sleepwalking. My father, always practical, suggested mice or drafts moving the doll. But their dismissals faltered when they saw how pale I was, how my hands wouldn't stop shaking. "It's just a toy, Lucy," my mother said, but her eyes lingered on the doll's face, and she didn't touch it. The incidents didn't stop. One evening, I found the doll in the hallway, propped against the wall as if waiting for me to pass by. Another time, it was in the kitchen, perched on the counter, a knife balanced across its lap. The notes kept coming too, appearing in places no one could have reached. Inside my locked diary, taped to the underside of my bed frame. "Help me," they begged, the handwriting growing more frantic, the letters jagged like they were scratched in a hurry. I stopped sleeping in my room. I'd curl up on the living room couch, but even there, I'd wake to find the doll nearby, once at the foot of the couch, once staring down from the mantel. My parents started to worry. They searched the house for signs of a prankster, checked the locks, even called a neighbor to ask if anyone had been sneaking around. Nothing. Still, they refused to believe the doll was anything more than an old toy. "We'll get rid of it," my father promised, but he never did. I think he was curious, maybe even fascinated by the mystery. One night, my babysitter, Clara, came over while my parents were out. She was 16, tough, and not easily spooked. I warned her about the doll, but she laughed, ruffling my hair. "It's creepy, sure, but it's just a doll, Luce." I showed her the notes, the ones I'd kept in a shoebox under my bed. Her smile faded as she read them, her fingers tracing the uneven scrawl. "Weird," she muttered, but she didn't laugh again. That evening, we watched a movie in the living room, the doll locked in the attic. Halfway through, Clara gasped, clutching her chest. "Something's heavy," she wheezed, her eyes wide. I followed her gaze to the rocking chair in the corner. The doll was there, its head tilted back, its stitched mouth open like it was laughing. Clara scrambled to her feet, her breathing ragged. "That wasn't there before," she whispered. I nodded, too scared to speak. When she rolled up her sleeve the next morning, we both saw the scratches, 3 red lines on her forearm, deep enough to draw blood. She left without a word, and I never saw her again. I started researching, sneaking to the library to read about strange objects, things that moved on their own. I found stories of other dolls, other houses, other people who'd felt this same dread. One account stuck with me. A doll that left notes, moved at night, and marked those who got too close. The details were too similar, too precise. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I wasn't imagining things. The doll's movements grew bolder. One night, I woke to find it standing at the foot of my bed, its arms outstretched as if reaching for me. I screamed, and my parents rushed in, but when they flicked on the light, the doll was back on the nightstand, innocent as ever. My father's face was pale, his usual explanations gone. The next day, I found a note inside my shoe, the paper damp and crumpled, the words smeared, "Help me, now." I couldn't take it anymore. I begged my father to destroy the doll, to burn it, to bury it, anything to make it stop. He hesitated, his eyes flicking to the doll as if it might hear us. Finally, he agreed to lock it away. We carried it to the attic, where he placed it in an old glass cabinet, the kind used for china or keepsakes. He secured the lock and taped a sign to the glass. "Warning, do not open." I noticed he avoided looking at the doll as he worked, his hand shaking slightly. For a while it seemed to work. The footsteps stopped. The notes stopped. I could sleep again, though I kept the attic door locked and avoided that part of the house. But every so often I'd hear something. A faint creak, a muffled thump, like something testing the cabinet's lock. I'd lie awake, wondering if it was still up there, waiting, watching. Months later, we moved. My parents said it was for a new job, but I saw the way they glanced at the attic door, the way they hurried to pack. We left the doll behind, locked in that cabinet. I never told anyone what happened, not my new friends, not my teachers. But sometimes I'd dream of it, those glossy eyes, that stitched smile, standing in the shadows of my new room. I'd wake up, heart racing, and check every corner, every drawer, half expecting to find a note. Years passed, and I tried to forget. I grew up, moved to a new city, started a life far from that old house. But last week, I was walking past an antique shop, its window crowded with old toys and trinkets. I stopped, my breath catching. There, in the corner, was a Raggedy Ann doll, its red yarn hair faded, its eyes glinting in the dim light. It wasn't the same doll. I told myself it couldn't be, but its smile was too familiar, too knowing. I turned away, my steps quickening, but I swear I heard it, faint as a whisper on the wind. "Help me." I don't go near antique shops anymore. I don't trust old toys or dark corners or houses with attics. I tell myself it's over, that it's just a memory. But some nights, when the house is too quiet, I hear those footsteps again, soft and deliberate, coming closer, and I wonder if it ever really let me go. Story 9. The Doll in the Attic. My name is Margot, and I'm 12 years old. I live in an old house on the edge of town, where the wind howls through the shutters and the floorboards groan like they're alive. This is my story, and I'm still not sure if I believe it myself. It started a year ago, after my baby brother Henry died. The house changed after that. My parents changed too. They barely looked at me, their eyes always distant, like they were searching for him in every shadow. I felt invisible, spending hours alone in my room, whispering make-believe stories to the walls. That's when she appeared, the doll I came to call Adelaide. It was a cold October night when I first saw her. I'd gone to bed, the house creaking under a storm's weight, when lightning flashed through my window. There, on my pillow, sat a porcelain doll. Her face was pale, her golden ringlets tangled with cobwebs, and one glassy blue eye was chipped, giving her a lopsided stare. I froze, my heart thudding. I hadn't seen her before, not in my room, not in the house. She wasn't mine. I reached out, my fingers brushing her cold, smooth cheek. She didn't move, but I swear her head tilted slightly like she was watching me. I should have screamed or run to my parents, but I didn't. I was lonely, and something about her felt familiar. I'd heard my father tell a story once about a haunted doll called Annabelle, a Raggedy Ann that ghost hunters swore was alive. This doll, though, wasn't soft or cloth. She was hard, delicate, and heavy with secrets. I named her Adelaide, after a character in a book I loved, and decided she was my friend. Maybe Henry had sent her to keep me company. That's what I told myself. The next night, I dreamed of Henry. He was floating in a pool of moonlight, his tiny hands clutching Adelaide. His laughter echoed high and sweet, but his eyes were wrong, empty, like hers. When I woke, my chest was tight. Adelaide wasn't on my pillow anymore. She was at my desk, her chipped eye glinting in the dawn. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Had I moved her in my sleep? I couldn't remember. I whispered, "Good morning, Adelaide," and her stillness felt like an answer. I started talking to her every day. I'd tell her about school, about how my parents forgot to ask about my day, about how the house felt too big without Henry. I'd set her up at the dinner table pretending she was a guest, her porcelain hands folded neatly. My parents didn't notice. They never did anymore. At night, I'd place her on my pillow, her cold weight oddly comforting. For a while, it was just us, Margot and Adelaide, two lonely souls in a quiet house. Then the drawing started. One morning, I found a piece of paper under my bed, scrawled with crayon. It showed my family, Mom, Dad, me, and Henry, but our eyes were scratched out, black zigzags cutting through our faces. I was colored red, a crude loop drawn around my throat like a noose. My breath caught. I hadn't drawn it. I glanced at Adelaide propped on my chair. Her chipped eyes seemed to gleam, like she knew something I didn't. I tore the paper up and threw it away, telling myself it was a prank, maybe from a cousin who'd visited weeks ago. But deep down, I knew better. The drawings kept appearing, under my pillow, in my school bag, tucked in the pages of my books. Always the same. My family, eyeless, with that red loop around my neck. I stopped sleeping well. I'd lie awake, staring at Adelaide, wondering if her painted lips curved just a little more each night. I tried hiding her in my closet once, but the next morning she was back on my pillow, her dress smoothed out like someone had fussed over it. One night, I heard it, a faint giggle like a child's coming from downstairs. I crept out of bed, my bare feet cold on the floorboards. The house was dark, the storm outside rattling the windows. I followed the sound to the nursery where Henry's old rocking chair sat in the corner. It was moving just slightly back and forth. Adelaide was there, perched in the chair, her porcelain face tilted upward. I froze. Her tiny hand was wrapped around a blanket in her lap, gripping it tight. The giggle came again, soft and echoing, but her mouth didn't move. My skin prickled. I backed away, my heart pounding, and ran upstairs. The next day I decided to hide her for good. I carried Adelaide to the attic, where the air smelled of cedar and mothballs. The attic was a maze of old trunks and forgotten things, lit only by a small round window. I set her against the rafters, her chipped eye catching a sliver of light. "Stay here," I whispered, like she could hear me. As I turned to leave, thunder rumbled, and I swore I heard something else. Thump, 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 like tiny footsteps on the attic floor. I didn't look back. That night, the dreams came again. Henry, floating in moonlight, his face pale and wrong. He held Adelaide, but now her eyes glowed red, and his voice whispered, "Help me." I woke gasping, my room freezing. My flashlight was gone from my nightstand. I stumbled through the dark, desperate to check the attic. When I opened the door, my breath caught. Adelaide wasn't where I'd left her. She was sitting on an old toy chest, my father's from when he was a boy. The chest's lid was cracked open just enough to see inside. My hand shook as I approached. Adelaide's head was tilted like she was guarding it. I lifted the lid, the hinges creaking. Inside was a velvet-lined pocket watch, its hands frozen at midnight, and an old photograph. The boy in the photo looked like Henry. Same round cheeks, same dark curls, but his eyes were wide with terror, his grin twisted. My stomach dropped. It couldn't be Henry. The photo was too old, the edges yellowed. But the resemblance made my skin crawl. Had Adelaide been here all along, waiting in this chest? The air turned icy. I glanced at Adelaide. Her painted lips curved into a smile, wider than before. A creaking sound came from behind the chest, slow and deliberate. I spun around, my heart in my throat. Cobwebs brushed my cheek, like something small was crawling over me. Then I heard it, a soft, urgent whisper. Henry's voice. "Help me." The words echoed in my skull. Adelaide's head snapped toward the staircase, her porcelain creaking like breaking bones. I grabbed my flashlight. Somehow, it was in my hand again, and the beam caught her eyes. They glowed red, bright, and alive. I screamed, dropping the flashlight. It hit the floor, and Adelaide fell too, shattering into pieces. Porcelain shards scattered across the wood, her chipped eyes staring up at me. I ran, my feet pounding down the stairs, till I crashed into my mother's arms. She was awake, her face pale, like she'd heard something too. We stayed downstairs all night, clutching each other, listening to the storm. In the morning, I crept back to the attic. Adelaide's pieces were still there, scattered like broken bones. Beside them was Henry's favorite red toy car, the one he'd played with every day before he died. I picked it up. The engine was warm, like someone had just been racing it across the floor. My hands trembled. I wanted to believe it was Henry, that he was still here, but the air felt wrong. Too still, too heavy. I never told my parents about the car. I buried it in the backyard, under the oak tree where Henry used to laugh. But sometimes, when the house is quiet and the moon hangs low, I hear him, his laughter high and sweet, coming from the nursery. And then, fainter, from the attic above, a soft patter, like tiny porcelain feet racing into the dark. I don't go up there anymore, but I know she's there, Adelaide or whatever she is waiting, and sometimes when I close my eyes, I see her chipped eye glowing red, watching me from the shadows. Story 10. The Boy in the Chimney. My name is Jack, and I was 12 when my family moved into the old stone house on the edge of town. The place was ancient, its walls whispering secrets in every creak and groan. I loved exploring its dusty corners, but the fireplace in the living room, it was different. It didn't just whisper, it screamed. My grandmother told me a story once about chimney sweeps from long ago who vanished without a trace, and how workers found a boy's skeleton sealed inside a London chimney. I laughed it off as a ghost tale, but when I stood by that fireplace, the air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. It started the first week we moved in. My little sister May, who was 7, kept waking up at night, saying she heard footsteps. Not the heavy boots of our dad or the soft shuffle of our mom, but light, quick steps, like a child running barefoot across the floorboards. I told her it was probably mice, but her wide eyes didn't believe me. She said the footsteps came from the living room near the fireplace. I didn't want to admit it, but I'd felt something too, a chill that didn't come from the drafty windows, a shadow that moved when the firelight flickered. That night, I decided to stay up. The house was quiet, just the tick of the old clock in the hall. The fire had died to glowing embers, casting a red haze over the room. I sat on the couch, a blanket over my knees, staring at the chimney. The darkness inside it seemed to pulse like it was alive. Then I saw it. 2 pinpricks of light, like eyes glowing in the black. My heart slammed against my ribs. I blinked, and they were gone. Just soot and shadow, I told myself, but my hands were shaking. The next night, I stayed up again. This time, I brought a flashlight. May begged to join me, but I sent her to bed. She was too young to be scared like I was. The clock ticked past midnight. The embers glowed softer now, and the chimney was a void. I pointed my flashlight into it, the beam cutting through the dark. Nothing, just bricks and ash. But as I lowered the light, I swear I saw a face, pale, smudged with soot, with hollow eyes staring right at me. It was there for a second, then gone, like smoke curling up the flue. I froze, my breath loud in my ears. The flashlight shook in my hand, but I didn't dare move closer. For a week, I kept watch. Every night, something new. One night, it was a thin arm, pale as bone, reaching out from behind the bricks before vanishing. Another night, I heard a faint scratch like nails dragging across stone. I told myself it was the house settling, but deep down, I knew better. May kept hearing the footsteps too. She'd wake up crying, saying she saw a shadow by her door, small like a boy. I checked her room, but there was nothing, just a faint smudge of soot on the wall, shaped like a tiny handprint. I wiped it away before Mom or Dad could see. Then May got sick. A fever hit her hard, and she was stuck in bed, her face pale and her eyes glassy. That night, the footsteps stopped. I sat by the fireplace anyway, waiting. The house felt different, too quiet, like it was holding something back. When I checked the hearth, I found it, a small pile of soot, shaped like a child's shoe print, right in the center of the fireplace. My stomach twisted. I called for May, but she was asleep upstairs, her breathing shallow. I didn't tell her about the print. I didn't want to scare her more. The next night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was in that chimney. I waited until the house was asleep, then crept to the fireplace with my flashlight. The embers were cold now, the hearth a black mountain. I leaned in, shining the light up the flue. The air was frigid, my breath clouding in front of me. Then I heard it, a soft, broken sound like someone crying. It came from deep inside the chimney, faint but real. My skin prickled. I swept the beam around, and there, high up, I saw a shadow move, not a trick of the light, a real shape, small and hunched. Before I could think, something grabbed my ankle. A rough, cold hand yanked hard, and I fell forward, my flashlight clattering across the hearth. The wall of the fireplace groaned, then slid open with a grinding screech. A hidden passageway gaped before me, its mouth spilling dim moonlight from somewhere deep inside. My heart pounded, but I couldn't stop now. I crawled in, the tunnel tight and choked with soot. The air smelled of ash and something sour like old cloth. My flashlight beam shook as I moved forward, the walls pressing close. Then I saw him, a boy no older than me, curled in a niche in the tunnel. His face was filthy, smeared with soot, his clothes ragged and gray. His eyes were sunken, but they locked onto mine, wide and pleading. He was real, flesh and bone, not a ghost. "Help me," he whispered, his voice cracked and dry. I froze. This was the boy from the story, the chimney sweep trapped decades ago. "I was locked here," he said, his words barely audible. So cold, so hungry. I reached for him, my hand trembling. His skin was ice cold, his fingers bony as they gripped mine. "We have to get out," I said, my voice shaking. He nodded, his eyes darting to the tunnel behind us. But as we started to crawl back, the walls shuddered. A low rumble filled the air, and dust poured from the ceiling. The tunnel was collapsing. The boy screamed, a sound that cut through me like a knife. I pushed at the falling debris, my hand scraping against sharp stone. "Go!" he cried, his voice breaking. I grabbed his arm, pulling him with me as we scrambled toward the hearth. Soot choked my lungs and the tunnel groaned louder. We were almost there when a slab of stone crashed down, blocking half the exit. I shoved it with my shoulder, pain shooting through me, but it budged just enough. We squeezed through, tumbling onto the living room floor as the passageway sealed shut with a deafening thud. The house went silent. I turned to the boy, my chest heaving. He was there, kneeling beside me, his eyes wide with relief. I reached out to hug him, but his clothes crumbled under my hands, turning to dust. His body felt cold like snow, and then he was gone. I sat there, covered in soot, my heart racing. The fireplace was still, the hidden door gone as if it had never been. In the morning, I found 2 tiny footprints in the ash leading up the chimney. I showed them to my dad, along with the soot handprint on May's wall, which had reappeared overnight. He frowned, his eyes lingering on the marks. Mom just shook her head and muttered about old stories. They didn't believe me, not really, but I saw the worry in their faces. I never told anyone about the boy's voice, but every night after that, when the fire crackled in the hearth, I felt him, a gentle presence, like a shadow at my side. He was grateful, I think, for being found, for being freed. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, I'd hear a faint whisper, too soft to make out, but it felt like a promise. He'd never be forgotten. The days passed, and May got better, her fever breaking like a storm clearing. But the house never felt the same. The fireplace stayed cold most nights. We didn't need the warmth, Mom said. I didn't argue. I stopped exploring the house after that, sticking to my room or the yard. But sometimes, when I passed the living room, I'd glance at the chimney. The air was still heavy, still watching, and once, just once, I saw a flicker of light in the dark, like eyes staring back. Story 11, The Hat Man, returns. My name is Sarah, and I'm 12 years old. The world I live in is small, just the creaky old house my family rents on the edge of town, with its sagging porch and peeling paint. The backyard stretches into a tangle of woods, and beyond that, an old shed nobody uses anymore. It's where I used to play, building forts out of splintered boards and pretending I was a knight or an explorer. That was before him, before the Hat Man. It started last summer when the air was thick and the cicadas screamed from the trees. I was in the shed, sorting through a box of dusty junk, old keys, a broken watch, a chipped teacup, when I felt it. A cold prickle on the back of my neck, like someone was standing too close. I turned, expecting to see my little sister Anna sneaking up to scare me. But the shed was empty, just cobwebs and shadows. Then I saw it, a tall, dark shape in the corner, barely more than an outline. A man, or something like one, wearing a top hat that tilted slightly as if mocking me. His face was hidden under the brim, but I felt his eyes on me, heavy and unblinking. I ran back to the house, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. When I told my mom, she laughed it off. "You've got a wild imagination, Sarah," she said, stirring a pot of soup, "probably just the heat playing tricks." But I knew what I saw wasn't a trick. That night, I lay in bed, staring at my closet door. It was always a little open, just a crack, because the latch was broken. In the moonlight, the gap looked like a black slash in the wall. I swore I saw it widen just an inch and heard a faint creak, like someone was pushing it from the inside. The next day, I went back to the shed, half convinced I'd imagined it. I was wrong. He was there again, standing in the same corner, his coat long and black, his hat casting a shadow that didn't match the light. I froze, my breath catching. "Who are you?" I whispered. He didn't answer, but his head tilted, and I swear I heard a low hum, like static from an old radio. I bolted again, but this time I felt something follow me, a cold weight in the air, like a storm about to break. That night I heard footsteps, not the soft patter of Anna sneaking in to steal my stuffed rabbit, but heavy, deliberate steps on the hardwood floor. Thump, thump, thump. They stopped outside my door, and then there was a soft tap against the wall, like a finger testing the plaster. I pulled the blanket over my head, my heart racing. When I peeked out, the room was empty, but my blanket was half off the bed, as if someone had tugged it. I didn't sleep. The Hat Man started showing up more often, in the shed, in the hallway, in the corner of my room at night. Always silent, always watching. My kitten, Muffin, started hissing at empty spaces, her fur puffing up like she saw something I couldn't. I tried to tell Anna, who's only 8 and thinks everything's a game. "You're making it up," she said, giggling. But one night, she saw something too. We were in the kitchen, sneaking cookies after bedtime, when she froze, staring at the doorway. "Sarah," she whispered, "there's someone there." I turned, and for a split second I saw him, a dark shape slipping past, his hat brushing the top of the frame. Anna screamed, and Mom came running, but he was gone. Mom said it was just shadows from the trees outside. I didn't believe her. The next morning, I found footprints. Not mine, not Anna's, not Mom or Dad's. They were big, muddy smudges on the kitchen floor, leading from the back door to the stairs. I followed them, my stomach twisting, until they stopped at my bedroom door. On my pillow was my favorite toy, a tiny silk top hat I'd found in the shed months ago, part of an old doll's outfit. It was crumpled now, the brim torn, like someone had crushed it in their hand. Next to it was a note, written in thin, spidery letters I didn't recognize. "Sleep tight." My hands shook as I tore it up and threw it in the trash. I stopped going to the shed after that. But he didn't stop coming. He was bolder now, appearing in broad daylight. I'd see him in the reflection of the bathroom mirror, standing behind me, or in the corner of the living room while I did homework. My friends at school noticed something was wrong. "You're so quiet lately," my best friend Lila said. I couldn't tell her about the Hat Man. She'd think I was crazy, but I was starting to feel crazy. I couldn't focus. Shadows seemed to move on their own, curling at the edges of my vision. Even Lila started avoiding me, her eyes nervous when I stared too long at nothing. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I was exhausted, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. The Hat Man stood by my bookshelf, his outline sharper than ever. The air smelled faintly of smoke, like burnt paper, even though it was a cool summer night. "Why are you here?" I whispered, my voice shaking. He didn't move, but I heard it again, that low, static hum, and then a voice in my head, cold and clear, "This is my house." I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't stop. My room, my shadows. I felt like I was drowning in his presence, like he was pressing into my thoughts, making them heavy and dark. I don't know where the courage came from, but I stood up, my legs trembling. "You don't own me," I said louder this time. "Get out." His head tilted, and for the first time I saw something under the brim. Not a face, but a void, like staring into a hole in the world. He raised a hand, pale and long, reaching toward me. I squeezed my eyes shut, picturing the brightest thing I could think of. The sun high in the sky, the meadow behind our old house where I used to run with Lila, laughing until we couldn't breathe. I held onto that image, clinging to it like a lifeline. When I opened my eyes, he was gone. The room was still, the air lighter. On the windowsill was a black top hat. Not the silk toy, but a real one, heavy and old, like something from a history book. I touched it, half expecting it to vanish, but it was solid, ordinary, just cloth and stitching. I threw it in the trash outside, burying it under potato peels and coffee grounds. The next morning, I felt different, lighter. Mom noticed it too, her eyes softening as she poured me cereal. "You look better today," she said. I didn't tell her about the Hat Man. I didn't need to. The fear was gone, replaced by something hard and certain. I'd faced him, and I'd won. But there was one thing I couldn't shake. On the wall by my bed, where he'd stood that last night, was a faint outline, like a shadow burned into the paint. It was shaped like a man in a top hat, and no amount of scrubbing would make it go away. I don't play in the shed anymore. I don't look at the closet door at night. But sometimes, when the house is quiet, I hug my stuffed rabbit and whisper, "Goodbye, friend, just in case." Story 12. The Children of the Hollow. My name is Samuel, and I was 12 when I first heard the whispers in the hollow. It was a muggy summer evening in 1897, and I'd been sent to fetch water from the creek behind our farm. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. My boots crunched on the gravel path as I carried the bucket, its handle biting into my palm. The woods were quiet, save for the faint hum of cicadas. Too quiet, I thought, though I couldn't say why. The bucket swung as I walked, and I kept my eyes on the ground, avoiding the gnarled roots that twisted across the path like veins. I'd heard the stories from the other kids in town. Tales of the hollow, a stretch of forest where the trees grew too close and the shadows never seemed to lift. They said children went missing there, swallowed by the earth or something worse. My older brother, Thomas, used to tease me about it, saying the hollow was hungry, that it waited for kids like me who wandered too far. I'd always laughed it off, but that evening, something felt wrong. The creek was only a short walk from our barn, but the woods seemed to stretch, the path winding longer than it should. When I reached the creek, the water was still, reflecting the last slivers of daylight. I knelt to fill the bucket, but a sound stopped me. A whisper, soft as a breeze, but sharp enough to make my skin prickle. "Samuel," it said, my name. I froze, the bucket half submerged, water lapping at my fingers. I looked around, but there was nothing, just trees and shadows. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe my imagination, but my heart thudded in my chest. I stood, gripping the bucket, and that's when I saw it. A flicker of movement in the trees, like a figure darting just out of sight. I should have run home. I know that now. But I was 12, stubborn and curious. I set the bucket down and stepped toward the trees, my boots sinking into the soft earth. The whispers came again, clearer this time, a chorus of voices, all children overlapping in a frantic hum. "Help us," they said. "He's coming." My breath caught. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but my throat tightened. The air grew colder, heavier, like a storm was brewing. Though the sky was clear, I pushed through the underbrush, branches snagging at my shirt. The whispers grew louder, guiding me deeper into the hollow. The trees parted, and I stumbled into a clearing I'd never seen before, though I'd walked these woods 100 times. In the center stood a house, old, sagging, its wood gray and splintered. The windows were dark, but each one showed a different scene. One glowed with the golden light of summer, another was choked with autumn leaves, a third dusted with snow, and the last bloomed with spring flowers. It was wrong, unnatural, like the house was trapped in 4 seasons at once. My legs trembled, but I couldn't turn back. The whispers were coming from inside. I climbed the creaking porch steps, the wood groaning under my weight. The door was ajar, hanging crooked on its hinges. I pushed it open, and a wave of cold air hit me, carrying the smell of mildew and something sour like rotting fruit. The hallway was dim, lit only by slants of light from the windows. The wallpaper hung in strips, peeling back to show layers from different times, floral patterns, then plain stripes, then something older, faded to gray. I called out, my voice small. "Hello?" The whispers answered, urgent now. "Help us, Samuel. He's here." My pulse roared in my ears. I stepped forward, my boots echoing on the warped floorboards. A staircase loomed at the end of the hall, leading up into darkness. I didn't want to go up there, but the whispers were pulling me, tugging at something deep inside. I placed a hand on the wall for balance, and it shifted under my touch. A panel slid open with a soft click, revealing a hidden room. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with dust. 3 children stood there, their clothes tattered, their faces pale as moonlight. A boy, maybe my age, wore a patched jacket from decades ago. 2 girls stood beside him, one in a dress that looked like it belonged to my grandmother's time, the other clutching a rag doll, her hair tied with a frayed ribbon. Their eyes were wide, hollow, and they stared at me like I was their last hope. "You came," the boy said, his voice rough, like he hadn't spoken in years. "He keeps us here, the man in the walls." "Who?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. The girl in the old dress pointed to the walls where faint scratches marked the wood like claw marks. "He hunts us," she said. "He never stops." The other girl, the one with the doll, whimpered, hugging it tighter. "I just wanted to go home," she said. "I miss my mama's bread." Ha! A chill ran through me. These weren't just stories. These were kids, like me, trapped in this house. I wanted to ask more, but a low groan shook the floor coming from upstairs. The children froze. "He's awake!" the boy hissed. "Run, Samuel, run now!" I didn't move. I couldn't. My eyes darted to the staircase, where heavy footsteps thudded, slow and deliberate. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. The children pressed against the walls, their faces twisted with fear. I backed toward the door, but the footsteps were getting closer, louder. A shadow stretched across the hallway, long and warped, like something not quite human. I bolted, my heart slamming against my ribs. I made it to the porch, but the whispers followed me, pleading, "Don't leave us." I stopped, guilt twisting in my gut. I couldn't abandon them. I turned back, gripping the doorframe, and saw him for the first time. A figure at the top of the stairs, tall and pale, with arms too long and eyes like black pits. He moved silently, his head tilting as if he could smell me. I ducked behind the porch railing, my breath ragged. The children's voices echoed in my head. I had to do something. I remembered the slingshot in my pocket, the one I used to shoot at cans in the yard. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. I pulled it out, my hand shaking, and grabbed a stone from the ground. The figure was descending the stairs now, his movements jerky, like a puppet on strings. I stepped back into the house, my slingshot raised. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The figure's head snapped toward me. I fired the stone, aiming for his chest. It hit with a dull thud, and he staggered, letting out a guttural roar that shook the walls. The children screamed from the hidden room. I fired another stone, then another, each one making him flinch but not stopping him. He lunged, his long arms swinging. I dove to the side, crashing into the wall. The panel slid open again, and the children spilled out, their eyes wide with hope. "Run!" I yelled, waving my slingshot to keep the figure's attention. The boy grabbed the girl's hands, pulling them toward the door. The figure turned, his empty eyes fixed on them. I fired another stone, hitting his shoulder. He roared again, swinging wildly, but I was already moving, darting around him in the narrow hall. The children made it to the porch, their footsteps light and frantic. The boy looked back at me. "Come with us," he shouted. I wanted to, but the figure was between me and the door now, his arms blocking the way. I backed into the hidden room, my slingshot trembling in my hands. The figure loomed closer, his shadow swallowing the light. I fired one last stone, aiming for his face. It struck his cheek, and he staggered, giving me a split second to slip past him. I ran, my legs burning, out the door and into the clearing. The children were ahead, their figures fading into the trees. The boy turned, his face lit by the rising sun. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft but clear. The girl with the doll held up her toy as if offering it to me. "For you?" she whispered. I nodded, too breathless to speak, and kept running. The hollow was silent as I stumbled back to the creek, my slingshot still clenched in my hand. The bucket was where I'd left it, water spilling over the rim. I grabbed it and ran home, not looking back. The farm was quiet when I got there, the first rays of dawn painting the fields gold. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not Thomas, not my parents. They wouldn't believe me. I never went back to the hollow. But every summer, when the air grew heavy and the cicadas sang, I'd walk by the edge of the woods. Sometimes I'd see the house in the distance, its windows still showing their impossible seasons. Once, I thought I saw a slingshot hanging in one of them. next to a rag doll in a patched jacket, I'd clutch my own slingshot tighter, remembering the children's faces, their voices, their freedom. And I'd keep walking, knowing I'd carried them out of the dark, even if no one else would ever know.